Hello there, and welcome to the Impact Zone podcast. We're back once more to talk more TNA wrestling shenanigans. And this time we're talking about how many older wrestlers you should have on your roster. It's one of those things. I think we talked about this a while ago. About how you should try to book legacy acts or whatever it was in wrestling, because it's like you've got to use them to their full potential, because again, how many years have you got these guys? You haven't got them for long, so you've got to use those guys to help, not just establish themselves or re-establish themselves sometimes. You've got to use them to help your young roster build up, and sometimes that takes a year or two or whatever it is, and you've kind of got to have this almost cyclical system of saying, okay, well, we're going to bring in Scott Steiner, or we're going to bring in this person or that person, or Rick Martel or whoever it is, and they're going to have a 1 year run or whatever it is in the company. And okay, we're going to begin here and then we're going to end here. Like, that's our plan for this person. Like, plans might change somewhat, but this is our plan. We want to get this person over. We want to build this person up. So we're going to stick them in a sort of a feud, a long-running feud with this person. And at the end of it, they're going to come out looking like roses, because this person's here for one last hurrah sort of thing, and they're trying to win the title, or they're trying to, redeem themselves, or whatever it is, or, their last run was, not good to say the least, or underwhelming to say the least, or they weren't used well, or whatever it was, but they still have star power, they still have value, and they can still offer something to the roster in of themselves as being a top star, but as in being a star that, hey, well, we've got to build some of these younger guys up in the roster, and we've got to, think for, well, not just our present, but our future, because, again, how long are you going to have any of these people, but you've got to be thinking long term. So it's tough to, put a definitive number on this, and we were talking a little while ago about what Paul Heyman was thinking of doing when he was going to come into TNA. He was going to get rid of most of the legends, if not all of the legends, that were kind of under contract with TNA. And like I said, I thought, maybe getting rid of some of them, yeah, that's a good idea. But I think, if you're saying, okay, well, instead of having, we have Ric Flair or whatever, we're not going to get rid of him, but we're going to put him not as a in-ring talent, we're going to put him in a manager role, which is, what I think he should have been mostly. I think maybe having one or two big matches properly could have worked, but I think, yes, they didn't do that, and I think maybe Rick was part of that, being like, I want one more match, which we see today. He always wants one more match, but that's the thing. It's like, well, if the story makes sense, yeah, sure, of course you can have him have more matches, but it's like, not just having matches. It's like, you've got to have these things pay off, and pay off big time, and then not just saying if Ric Flair's going to wrestle and he's going to wrestle, or who's he going to face. And I think the story he had with Jay Lethal was pretty darn good. I don't want to go too deep into this, but I just want to sort of say this, but I think capitalizing on it at a certain point was a good idea. I think they had a match at Sacrifice, was it, I think, or something like that, and I think they even had a Impact TV match. It's one of those things I think that they continually did here and there as well, was, and they sort of shot themselves in the foot a bit with this, is having these matches on free TV. if you're going to say, oh, it ended in DQ or it ended this way or that way, okay, all right, we can sort of get that as long as there's a payoff coming down the road later on. You know, we're not going to just sit here and have you tell us, oh no, that's it, you know, whatever, because people aren't going to go for that. People aren't going to accept that that was it, you know, and whatnot, and it shouldn't have been Flair then, you know, really, you know, it should have been somebody else in their way to, you know, build that storyline up further and make sure that Rick could, you know, have one good match rather than try and have, you know, two somewhat good matches or whatever. But again, I don't disagree 100% with the idea of limit the number of legendary wrestlers or whatever, iconic wrestlers or older wrestlers, because I do think that if you have too many of them, it starts to water down everything. It starts to becoming like, well, who's the focus here? Who's like the people that you're trying to, you know, get over? Who are the people that you're trying to entertain with this, you know, sort of menagerie of these wrestlers at the end of the day? Because yes, it's stupid not to say, oh well, Scott Steiner is available and let's bring him in and do something with him. Obviously let's try to bring him in and let's do something with him, but just saying, oh, let's bring him in and do something with him isn't, you know, the be all and end all of it. You need to have, right, you know, even if he's going to be here for more than a year, well, or whatever it is, how long is he going to be here? Well, we don't know. Maybe he's going to be here for the day until he retires, but we're going to wait and see, sort of thing, you know. But the thing is, you've got to start saying, right, well, he can't be a main event talent for very long, you know, because again, you know, he's a lot older, and he, you know, people are going to get sick of him being at or near the top, even though he didn't really get his proper dues in WCW or whatever it was. You know, just to say, oh well, we brought in Scott Steiner and we gave him some runs, you know, at the top, that's great, but where that's not who you are. You're not trying to be WCW. You're trying to bring in somebody like that to elevate the roster or elevate the interest in, you know, the company or the roster or the potential matchups that they can bring to the roster, the potential rivalries that they can bring to the roster. It's more about that sort of stuff. It's all about, you know, putting those butts in the seats, getting those buys on pay-per-view, getting those views on TV and all of that sort of stuff. That's, you know, your revenue, where your revenue comes from, all that. This is how you make money. You're not just buying these contracts or making these deals, getting these talent just because, oh look, we can do it. We're doing this because, hey, we've got a plan for this person. You know, if it's short term, okay, we've got a plan for that. If they stay longer term, okay, well, we'll talk more in maybe a year's time. You know, reassess where we're at and go from there, you know. Because it is very hard to think extremely long term. But if you start saying, well, if they're here for longer, we'll make plans for them, you know. But obviously we don't know what they're going to be doing. We don't know where they're going to be at. We don't know how long, or, you know, what we've got them for. It does depend on the person. It does depend on the circumstances. It is one of those things where, hey, injuries happen again, you know, or, you know, whatever else, or things just don't click, or whatever it is, you know, in some way, in some form, in some fashion. That's what sort of happened to Scotty in WWE. Things just didn't work. And, you know, again, not 100% his fault, but again, perhaps he, you know, should know, hey, well, I've got this bad foot, you know, what am I going to be doing, it'd be better for me, you know, if I was in there, you know, with somebody else, you know, or especially baby faces, because then I can heal it up and, you know, sort of cover myself and dictate my matches more so, and make sure I don't have to work too hard, you know, that little bit. Because, like, being the baby face, you've got to fire up and do all of this other stuff and whatnot. Whereas if you're the heel, you've just got to, you know, shut down the baby face at all costs, sort of thing. So yeah, that's not a bad. I think that would have been, again, a better idea. And, like, I think we talk about DDP getting that stalker gimmick and being, like, you know, a necktie for him. I think, like, that stalker gimmick would have worked way better for Scott Steiner, because that's the sort of thing that he would do. You know, it makes sense for him. But yeah, anyway, if you're looking, like I said before, I think if you're looking at each division separately, I think it makes a little bit more sense to sort of look at things as divisional. And you can transition people in and out of divisions as well. But especially when you've just signed somebody, and they just signed Scott Steiner when they had Sting. So having them, you know, in a rivalry, okay, all right, that makes some amount of sense to sort of start with. You know, you've got to go from somebody somewhere and, you know, sort of trying to say, well, this person's as important, you know, as, you know, this other person. We want them both to be considered at or near the top of the card, you know, and figured in heavily to the plans going forward. You know, so that's your sort of first year or first couple of years, maybe, depends how long. And maybe it was a handshake agreement between them to say, oh yeah, you come in and you work some dates or whatever it is. I don't know the specifics of it, but again, just saying, you know, like, this is what we have planned, you know, whatever. We've got a plan for you to be near the top, at the top, for your first, like, year or 6 months or 8 months or whatever it is. If we come back to the negotiating table and we still feel like you're a top main event level asset, or we'll keep you in that sort of spot. You know, even if you start saying, well, we want you in a tag team role, but we, you know, like with Booker T or whatever in the main event Mafia or whatever it is, you start saying, well, we're still going to feature that sort of tag team or that story, or more so, or you guys in a more main event role most of the time as well. You're not going to just, you know, be the mid-card guys or whatever else, because it's too important, not just for you guys, but for whoever you're feuding with or whatever it is. But it's hard to figure out a specific, like, you can only have one or you can only have two in the whole company. That's like a very low number. And I think, like, having one per division does seem fine as well. But maybe you can, like, if you have, like, again, a legacy tag team, I would count that sort of as one, because it's like, yeah, these guys, Team 3D, whatever it is, they're a unit. They're going to be a unit. They're not going to just, or the Hardys, whoever else it is, they're not just going to come in, like, mostly and just be like, oh, these guys, yeah, they're a tag team, but are they wrestling together? And I know the Hardys didn't wrestle together for a while, but again, like, obviously that's the thing that you want to try to do with them. When you see a legacy act, you're saying, right, you and Booker, let's go, you know, or you and Booker and Scotty, you guys, you know, because you've got Kurt Angle there and you've got Sting, you know, and whatever else you've got. So you've got a whole bunch of other stuff going on there and whatever, to sort of find yourself that sort of, you know, mixture of talent, you know, But it is one of those things. It's not just the law of diminishing returns in a sense, but it's also the law of sort of like, I don't know, not sort of similar to diminishing returns, but sort of like getting too many big fish in the pond sort of thing, where you've just got all these big fish in this really little pond, and it's like, well, they're not all going to fit, type thing, or they're going to squish out, or devour the little fish, so to speak. And it is one of those things where they can outshine some of the others that are there. And again, you need to have some of these guys being over, because it's like, well, if they're never winning and they're never doing anything and they're not presented in a fashion that, again, dictates their level of importance in some ways, well, what are you doing with them? Then when you go to beat them with somebody, it's like, well, who cares, because you haven't invested that time, that energy, that effort into making them feel like they're special, making them feel like they're worth beating, because, hey, they've just been kind of here and haven't really done anything of any note. No, if you have these guys being wrecking shop and whatever else, and being, dominant, or, singles wrestler or tag wrestler or whatever it is, or a faction or whatever it is, you're starting that perception of them being, hey, these guys are important, these guys are, up there, and you've got to work hard to, get to their level. And, now you see somebody coming along, you see Samoa Joe or whoever it is coming along, and you see that feud of Steiner and Joe, whatever it is, and then you finally see the payoff where Joe finally beats him. Same with like Kurt Angle, same idea, even though he was a lot younger and he could, go a lot more. So it depends on, again, the ability of the performer sometimes as well, as to what, sort of fit, how much figured in you can be. Because again, if you're Scott Steiner and you can't go out there and perform at the level required, at a certain point it's like, well, what can we do? We can't help you because, your foot's bad or whatever, and maybe you need to go away and get that surgery, or you need to wait until you are fully healed. I think you did do that, but like, again, if you were in that situation, you have to say to yourself, well, there isn't any point in us continuing until, this issue sort of is resolved, or we can find a way around this, or, let's put you again in a tag team. You can't go like you want to go, or like we need you to go, right? Well, let's put you with somebody in a tag team, and let's, work around you there, so you can halve your workload effectively. But yeah, so I don't know the exact formula for it, but I don't think you should outright, cull the roster of half the talent that they've got. But certainly you need talent for these people to be getting over on as being main eventers, or as being top level draws, to get that legitimacy. And just saying, oh, well, we're not going to invest money into this person or that person or whatever, or this team or that whatever. It's like, well, that's silly, because it's like, yes, it's a big investment, but it's also something that could be a good payoff if you know what to do with it, and you say, well, why are we bringing these guys in, or why are we doing this? I think the ECW Hardcore Revolution type thing that they did with Dreamer and all that coming in, I think they probably, wasn't the best thing to do, but it was what they did. But again, having these guys sort of come in, or some of these guys come in and say, we want a chance, is sort of fine, I think. It's just, saying that we're going to do one big ECW effectively show, just for the fact that the last few shows or the last show bombed or whatever. I don't think that what does that add again? And it's like, well, if you're going to do this one show, it's like, well, what does that give us? Obviously we've got to work something out where you guys are here more long term and doing something, and being a part of this, and having this whole rivalry with this person or that person or whatever. So it's one of those things of saying, well, we're not just gonna not phone it in per se, but we're not going to just say, oh well, you're all here on the same level. You should be saying, well, what are we going to do with you guys? Obviously we're going to do this, because this is the angle. But it's not just that. It's like, well, we've got to just think, well, you're not just here to you and Tommy and Raven or whatever it is. We've got to have somebody versus Abyss or whoever. Like, find some of you young guys that you have there and say, okay, well, we're going to try to put them on the same par as some of these guys, or even above some of these guys, so that again they have that rub, they have that thing there where people go, holy crap, Abyss just whooped all these guys, and he's won this tournament, or he's won this battle royal, he's won against these this gauntlet or whatever it is. So you've got that build for him, seeing like he's like up there, he's like definitely figured in, not just being like a guy that's there or whatever else, and he doesn't matter or whatever, and he's not going to have anything significant to work with. Same with whoever else you want to sort of start going, right, well, we've got to give this person a bit more of an edge, or we've got to make people think that this person has more than that. And again, it's just like the overabundance of like a show like that sometimes, of like, here's 50 hardcore matches, and like it's like, well, it's a bit much, because it's like, well, yeah, you can get your fans of that sort of style, but it's like, well, what is ultimately the payoffs is like, well, the chair shots, the tacks, whatever else you're going to use becomes less and less and less and less the longer and more that you use them on a show like that. So it's again something that you've got to think about. But yeah, I certainly think that you've got to have some of that sort of star power from the past, but having too much is certainly like a problem. But like, it also depends. It starts saying, well, who do you count as older talent or more established talent or whatever, that do they not deserve something, some sort of thing to come in, or to do something, or to appear, or to have a match, or to have a feud, or whatever it is. And it always says, like, it depends. Like, when you were feuding Bubba Ray with Hulk Hogan and the Aces and Eights, it was like, dude, like, is Hogan going to have a match? It's like, probably not. So, like, you need to move the focus away from Hogan to somebody else, because it's like, well, unless like he like throws him out of the company or something like that, that's fine, because then you've kind of got him out of the way, and people might think, oh, he might come back or whatever. But like, if you've got that perspective of saying, right, well, we've got to move him on to somebody that can actually perform in the ring, and actually they get that win, or that dub, or that redemption, or whatever it is that we're trying to make here. It's like, well, what did that bring to the story? Like, or whatever. If it's just another challenger that they need to establish themselves with, then they at least need somebody that's somewhat credible as well. Because it's like, again, if you're just facing somebody for the sake of facing them, it's like, well, that's not gonna get over, and it's not gonna work very well. Like, you can do it, but again, it's just sort of like, well, people probably know the results, so it's like, well, this isn't, ideal. But anyway, it is what it is, and I do think that, like, doing one thing too drastically or doing the opposite thing too drastically is just a recipe for saying, well, we don't really, have, enough thought into this, and we haven't considered this from all angles. Certainly we can't have 1,000 people on our roster or whatever it is, or even, half of that. But again, like, even with the number of people that is pretty thin right now, as we were sort of saying, but it's still like a lot of people don't get their TV time sometimes, and you don't need a TV time every single week. But again, when you're the major storyline, it's tough to be like, well, you're not going to get anything or not a lot, because it's like, well, we do need to build this feud, and we do need to build this match, and we do need to get these people to try to buy tickets, try to buy this show, whatever. So we've got to feature our major guys, because again, that's what people come to see, that's what people pay to see at the end of the day. So you sort of got to have a bit of everything. You've got to have your lower card guys that are on the way up. You've got to have your upper card guys that are there, that are bringing in the dollars. But you've got to have those guys that are on the rise, that you go, right, well, we're actually putting a lot of effort into these guys. You've got to have your opening acts. You've got to have everything. So, but yeah, that's what I mean. It's a tough balancing act. It's not just, let's get rid of all the legends, or let's have 50 legends, or whatever it is. It's like, how do we find that balance? Where is the tipping point? One or two per division, depending. Like, maybe if it's a tag team, we can have maybe a couple or whatever. But again, saying, oh, we're going to bring in the Rock and Roll Express, or we're going to bring in this team or that team, or we're going to bring in somebody from Japan, or we're going to bring in these people here, or we're going to bring in that person there. Okay, sure. But like, more than that, like, why? What for? Not just for one random match. Maybe if it's a trial match, if it was like on Explosion or whatever, yeah, sure, okay, that's fine. That's different, because it's just like a match that most people probably wouldn't see or whatever anyway. But there might be hype out there from the fandom to be like, holy crap, did you see that such and such turned up and had a match with such and such, or whatever else it is. And then people might be going out and going, hey, well, I've got to see this. Or, did you know that this person or that person was in TNA at this point, or whatever. And like, a lot of people would go, holy crap, were they? It's like, wow, I've got to check that out, or whatever. So it's a good thing sometimes to have these little Easter eggs there and whatnot as well, for people to find and discover and whatnot. So, but yeah, it is what it is. And hopefully, as I say, we've got to keep the roster strong no matter what. Like, as long as the roster is strong and robust. Like, I think they've got Kazarian and Eric Young and PCO. Those are the older talent that I would consider. Maybe Nick Nemeth is sort of starting to push into that space as well, I think, as well. But those are sort of the older talent that they have now. But you've got a lot of younger talent. You've certainly got some more established talent, though. Some of those are leaving or whatever at some point soon. But still, like, again, I said, you've got to build that roster, and you've got to bring in more people and whatnot. But it's like, well, it's all a balancing act. You can't bring in a whole bunch of just WWE main eventers and expect it to be like really good. If you bring in a few here and there and trickle them in, and they lose to these people or that person, or you bring in Charlie Haas or whoever it is, it's like, well, what's the payoff here? Who are they feuding with? Are they going to be a good guy? Are they going to be a bad guy? What's the situation, etc. But that's what you've really got to work out. You've really got to work out, what's the purpose of everything, not just saying, oh, we're going to bring in this person because we feel like that's the right thing to do, or that's a big money draw. Yes, they're obviously, but it's like, well, okay, we're going to bring them in. Okay, or we're thinking about bringing them in. Right, well, what are we going to do with them? We've got to think more about like the potential that they have, or, maximizing that potential to transition within 6 months to a year or whatever it is. But yeah. So yeah, but I hope you guys, you probably guys understand what I mean. I think it's like the moderation rule, I guess. Everything in moderation type thing. So that's where I think that things should be at. Not too much, but not too little. But yeah. So guys, that's pretty much it for this one. I hope you guys have enjoyed this one, and I hope you guys will join me again in another one.